All right, well, with that, we're going to get started. So thank you all for being with us today in what I consider a very important breakout session, one that's close to my heart and one that I was honored to be chosen to moderate. This is sometimes a hard topic to cover, but I think we all agree that it's critically important to have the dialogue, especially to those of us that are leading the young people today. I'm honored to be here with a panel of incredible experts, people who are thinking about mental health and mental performance every day, who have important and difficult personal experiences with this subject, and who are deeply committed as professionals and as human beings to equipping athletes and those around them with the right tools to help us all do better. So I know you're going to learn a lot here. I've asked the panelists to each introduce themselves, just their name and their organization. I'm then going to go into a very targeted question for each of the individuals so you can understand more about their background and why they're doing what they're doing today. But I'm just going to run down the line and have everyone, you can see their names up there, but name and organization, and then we'll get into the questions.
Great. Good morning. My name's Kevin McCarthy. I'm the Executive Director of Downtown United Soccer Club located here in New York City.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Kenza Gunter, and I serve as the Director of NBA Mind Health, which is the league's mental health and wellness platform.
Good morning. My name is Adam Wright. I run sports psychology for the Washington Nationals Major League team.
Good morning. I'm Mark Moreau. I'm the founder of Leading Edge Lacrosse in New Jersey, a proud partner with Dynamic Sports Management, and head coach at Rumson Fairhaven High School, boys lacrosse in New Jersey.
Hey everyone, Tyree Burks here, the founder and CEO of Players Health here from Minneapolis.
So we've got the credibility nailed already. Amazing. Ken, so I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. You contributed to a Wall Street Journal article a year or so entitled Athletes and Mental Health, a Long Overdue Conversation. So I wonder, is it still long overdue, or have we made any progress in the last year that's worth celebrating, even if we still have a long way to go?
Well, I absolutely think that we've made progress. I think when the article came out, it was certainly on the heels of several athletes having shared their personal stories, thinking about Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, and athletes before that, DeMar DeRozan, Kevin Love, Shamika Holdsclaw, if you go further back. I think there have been moments where athletes have shared their humanity with us, but we have not necessarily translated that conversation into the sport domain to think through how we can offer resources. And so I think the conversation is absolutely happening. The fact that we're here in this breakout is evidence of that. And I really do attribute a lot of the movement to the courage and vulnerability of the athletes, right? Because I think what we're hearing is certainly we can value, honor, praise their performance, but we can't do that at the exclusion of recognizing that they're people. Right? We have to value their humanity. We have to provide resources for them to take care of them from top to bottom, right? And I know we often talk about mental health and say it's a difficult topic, and that's one of the things that I hope this conversation shifts. It doesn't have to be a difficult topic. We all have mental health. Everybody in this room has mental health. And so if we can shift even how we position it in our conversations, I think that goes a long way as well, kind of thinking through mental health as a part of health. Right? It's a part of what allows us to move and think and feel and behave in the world. And so if we can start to think about and position mental health as what it is, a part of all of us, a human part of all of us, and something that we need to attend to in the ways that we attend to other areas of physical health, then I hope the conversation continues and we can move from conversation to action as it relates to providing resources and really being integrative in how we take care of ourselves, take care of our athletes, and think through what health looks like in the athletic space.
Amazing. And we'll make sure that we get a link to the journal article so you can read what's there within the Hoover app, so you guys can take a look at that. But thank you, Kenza. Kevin, you lead Dusk and are responsible for thousands of players, hundreds of coaches. Mental performance starts at the top. So I'm curious, as the old saying goes, you can't successfully help others before helping yourself. So what are some tips and strategies for your own self-care? How can you, and how that impacts the way you're a role model for others?
I breathe. And I try to be as mindful as possible about that, especially when I'm in situations that I might be a little uncomfortable in, like today, where I'm privileged to speak to you, but that's something that I have learned to consistently go back to when I feel mentally challenged, is to slow down. Take 4 deep breaths, hold it for 2, and try to exhale on 6. I know there are other methods. I think there's a 15 count. I use a 12 count. I have seen that a lot of baseball players are actually doing that kind of mindful breathing when they get to the plate. I think that's something that is relatively new, and I'm sure it's because of people like Adam that's happening. So that's one of the foundations of my self-care. One of the things that I also look to is I look to work towards my strengths and to bring them into my work. And it's something that I think I'll speak later when we get to how we integrate that into the club. But I've learned a lot from Dr. Martin Seligman, who's a psychology professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He has done a lot of work on positive psychology, the psychology of happiness. And as the director of a youth club, I can't think of anything more important than having our players and families essentially be happy. As a soccer executive, I would be remiss if I did not mention the Yates Report, which I'm sure you all have seen in different media outlets over the last few days, and I think speaks to the mental health of the athletes not only in the NWSL, but one of the things that stood out to me in that article was that that type of behavior was systemic in youth soccer. And so I think that this panel and what I'll learn in here, and if there are things that I can share to move us towards improving that, I'm really eager to participate today.
I really appreciate that. Mark, let's talk a little bit about the high school environment in particular for a few minutes. I know your work and organization has been deeply influenced by personal and tragic loss. Talk to us a little bit about the pressures that are facing high school athletes today and how you're responding, what's working. I know from our earlier conversation, you believe collaboration is key. Tell us a little bit more why.
Sure. So it's about 5 years ago now, unfortunately, one of my players that I coach in high school took his own life. Certainly, I'm a lacrosse coach. I don't teach in the school. I have a lacrosse business. I was not prepared or schooled in any way, and honestly didn't even really think too much about mental health or wellness. We thought about lacrosse and how we could win the most games the next season, and all of a sudden that just got turned upside down. My athletic director called me that Sunday night and said, "Can you be in school tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock?" And I showed up, and he said, "There's a bunch of boys in the auditorium looking to see you." And I walked in, and there's 90 boys just devastated. And it just really, that moment, it just changed my approach. The school, it was more what you can't do and what you shouldn't do, not what you should be doing or this is your next step. It was, we had to figure this out for ourselves. And really the first thing that we did was just listen to the boys and talk to them and really listen even more. And as, that year went on and then subsequent years go on, it became more of a collaboration with the boys and the players and their parents as well, because, the boys are devastated, the parents are frightened of who's next. And so many different, they get a bad grade, they had a bad game, they didn't make varsity. All these things come into play. And we just kind of opened up the lines of communication. And then COVID came and kind of took that reach away day to day. But we kind of leaned on technology, and we probably use it more now than we even did during the COVID year to stay in touch with the boys and FaceTiming. We do Google Meets with them. And, you know, we don't really tell them what we're doing anymore. We kind of tell them this is what we need to accomplish. How are we going to accomplish it? And we include them in a lot of that decision making. And we're certainly a lot more transparent with the parents as well. You know, it's not this little black box what we do with their boys for 2 or 3 hours a day. It's, you know, they know what's going on, and you know, we have a good relationship with them, and there's a good two-way dialogue, because we don't know how they behave when they get home, and they don't really know how they behave when they're at practice either. So it's collaboration has gone a long way to healing us and healing the boys and the program and the community. And it just so happens it's also led to the most success the program's ever had in the history of the program. And amazing that something so tragic actually led to that.
Yeah, really incredible to hear that story, and incredibly tragic to hear that story. But the way the community has rallied behind the school, the team, the community, really, really incredible. So thank you, I appreciate that. Adam, you've put a high priority on a holistic approach in understanding the correlation between off-field mental health and on-field performance, both mental and physical. Can you talk a little bit more about this and your commitment to defining and teaching mental health for all stakeholders involved?
First, I just want to say I appreciate how you leveraged that situation, horrible, tragic situation, and allowed for the whole community to experience post-traumatic growth. And I think it speaks to creating an ecosystem of a high challenge environment with a high support environment. That's what we try to do with the Nats, and that's what I try to do with all my athletes. And I think that holistic approach comes from my training, because I've always lived this intersection of the physical and mental. I worked as an exercise physiologist and a strength coach for many years, and then as a mental skills coach after I got my doctorate in sports psychology. So I see every athlete as a biopsychosocial person. So you have to understand their physiology, their psychology, their emotions, and how they interact with the environment, and how the environment interacts with them. And we often make the mistake that if someone's performing at a very high level, then they have it all figured out. Just because they're thriving here doesn't mean they're thriving there. And we see these tragic events like yours. 5 NCAA athletes in March and April took their lives. Even in the MLB, a young man named Drew Robinson. I don't know if anyone's heard of his remarkable story. Is everybody familiar with Drew? He, very typical situation where, you know, you're bouncing around minor leagues and major leagues, and you're getting optioned, and you got DFA'd, and COVID hit. And he's with the San Francisco Giants. They canceled the minor league. He signed a minor league contract. They canceled the season. And he was alone, and he was suffering. And he thought the best decision was to pick up a handgun and put a hole in his head. The surprise was he didn't succeed. He did put a hole in his head, but he didn't die. And he woke up 4 hours later, and then again 20 hours later, and said, you know what? I don't want to do this. I want to live. Called EMS, and he saved himself. And the way he described it, when I've heard him speak, he's an impressive young man, is basically he didn't kill himself, but he killed his ego. And he finally reached out and got the help that he needed psychologically to help him deal with these issues. And he actually worked his way back up to AAA, believe it or not, hit 3 home runs with one eye. Talk about a resilient, anti-fragile athlete, and just a remarkable. Now he hung up his spikes, and he's a mental health advocate. But there's something to be said for all of us when we're looking at our athletes and not making assumptions that just because someone is thriving doesn't mean they're truly flourishing on all their life. And it's up to us to get to know our athletes, ask questions, open up the dialogue and conversations. No, you might not be an expert, but you can listen. And truly stop and get to know who you're speaking with all aspects of their being. And then once that happens, know internally within the system, where do I go? If there is an issue, how do I direct my athlete to get help? And even more so, if you're a director or administrator, create an environment of high support. So that means, what do we do? If the athlete has an appointment with a mental health practitioner, allow them to miss practice. Don't continue to put pressure on these kids and athletes so that they feel that they don't have time to get the help that they need. Support them, be transparent, ask them what you can do. Most importantly is that they feel connected and that they're not alone.
Really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Take a deep breath between each of these questions because the answers are so powerful. And I don't typically read off a script, but the questions are so important that I don't want to miss an element of it. So Tyree, through Players' Health, you specifically call out the reality of things like hazing, bullying, other forms of abuse in the youth sports environment. Are there signs of these experiences that you see organizers often overlook or underestimate? And this is a tough question, but can you tell us about the fine line between motivation and toughness in coaching?
Yeah, and I would agree in terms of taking deep breaths in between responses because, this is a very complex topic. And at Players Health, we deal with kind of the best and the worst of sport, and that we see and investigate thousands of abuse incidents. And I liken to think that when we look at the transaction between kids and sport, there are things that we give to our kids. There are deposits that we put into them. Things like confidence, things like motivation, inspiration. These are things that sports gives to kids. And then, but at the same side, the other side of that coin is that there's withdrawals. There are things that sports are taking away from kids, or their experience of sports is taking away from them. What we're seeing is there's a healthy balance in terms of how I motivate, but we've seen countless of examples where things have been taken away from kids. 3 weeks ago, Texas youth football, DeSoto County, a coach and a referee got into an altercation and a coach was shot and killed in front of his own son and his entire team. Something was taken away from those kids. They'll never be the same again. They can't get that back. Their innocence, all of that, the way that they view the world has been dramatically changed. How are we going to interact with that? So I don't think organizations are prepared for the complexities that is happening at all the games. So we're not just dealing with teaching kids. I'm not just a coach. I'm not just a ref. I'm now having to manage parents. I'm now having to manage a very complex ecosystem that is surrounding these kids. And I think we have to, policies, protocols, we have to be more proactive to prevent the likelihood that we withdraw what kids should be getting from sports. Kid loses their confidence, their motivation at a certain point of their life, they may not ever get it back. And the last thing we want to have to do is now fix what was broken at 10. This was, I think it was at a U12 football game. Another example, I had a parent reach out to me in desperation. I make myself accessible. Our mission at Players Health is to create the safest and most accessible environment possible for an athlete to play the sport that they love. I had a parent reach out to me, hey, I don't know what to do. One of my athletes, coach lost it on a kid in a game. He made a mistake. And then in practice, when he showed up to practice, he played baseball. The coach made him put marbles in his cleats and tie him extra tight. Now, the parents didn't know any of these things were going on. This had gone on for maybe 2 to 3 practices, and they didn't know until the kid was limping coming in. And then, of course, he told what was happening. Those scenarios are things that we are now trying to get ahead of. I don't want to have to respond to those incidents. I want to be proactive to look for what kind of culture are we surrounding our kids? What are we holding our coaches accountable for in terms of being and creating a positive environment? What KPIs are we tracking day in and day out that actually motivate coaches and members to invest in that, in a positive environment? And so I think we're just seeing that we have to be more proactive. We're not prepared. We don't have all the tools. And that's fine as long as we recognize it and then focus on what preventative measures we can put in place.
Yeah, that's an excellent response to all 5 of you. Incredible responses. So I'm going to go now and sort of just ask sort of panel style, whoever's comfortable in sort of answering and commenting on some of these issues. The sense of responsibility that comes with the roles that you hold. You guys are all experts, and like I said, you all have established immediate credibility with this room. But with this sense of responsibility, it's huge. So how do you think about this responsibility yourselves? What drives you personally? Maybe, again, a personal story, or maybe it's a coach, maybe it's an administrator. But it's a big sense of responsibility, and obviously something needs to drive you. So Whoever wants to answer first.
I'll jump in. I think, first of all, when we talk about mental health, we're not talking about signs and symptoms. We're talking about people and their lived experiences. And so we all work in the world of sport, but we work with people, and that alone creates a huge responsibility. I also think that the responsibility of creating environments where people can thrive is not just the responsibility of those who work in the space of mental health and performance, right? It's everybody's responsibility. Like, if you think about the coaches help to create the environment, the parents create the environment, the administrators and those who run the leagues create the environment. Like, I think one of the things that we have done that has done us a disservice is we've positioned mental health as if it's exclusively an individual phenomenon, that if somebody is dealing with something, then they need to go and figure out how to heal themselves and then come back to the group when you're well, right? The truth is, mental health is impacted by things that happen in us, to us, and around us, back to that biopsychosocial model. So it's not just what's going on in my biology, but what's happening in my social space and what's happening systemically, because things that happen in the world also impact us. Look no further than the last 2.5 years to see that. So I think it's all of our responsibility to think through how are we contributing to a space that is allowing room for people to be healthy, to ask for help, and to thrive, right? Or are we contributing to a space that is diminishing a person's ability to function? Like, I think about these environments as gardens, right? Like, you need certain elements in order for the seeds that are planted there to thrive. So how are you tending to your garden? And if you're not, well, that's problematic, right? And everybody has that responsibility. So, I mean, I think you might hear the passion. I think it's an honor and a privilege to work with people, to step into the space and to be able to try to help shape, guide, help, and support them. And so I think if we remember we work in sport but work with people, that will create a different level of responsibility, I think, across the board.
Great.
Dr. Cutter, I love that metaphor with the flower, because if a flower dies, do we say there's something wrong with the flower, or do we look to the soil? I think we have to use that in terms of how we engage with our athletes and our organizations. And I also think we have to start looking at sport as not necessarily the destination. It's merely a vehicle of many that we can help people thrive. And how are we leveraging that? And I think that's a massive responsibility, and it is a privilege. I think it every day, particularly in the world of applied sport psychology and performance. I also work with law enforcement and other individuals where it's not just striking out that's the problem, right? As you make a mistake in the field, it could be life and death. And I'm never off. Not only do I think about it constantly, but my phone is constantly on, and that's a commitment that I've made by getting into this field. And I believe, if I had $1 billion in the bank, I wouldn't do anything different.
I'd like to jump in with a story that happened with our club. A couple of years ago, we had our 11-year-old team practicing at Randall's Island, and one of the brothers, a 5-year-old of one of the players on that team, was playing by the bank of the East River and fell in, got caught in the current, and drowned, while his brother's team was training 40 feet away. Their parents jumped in to try to save him. I actually was notified, got there within 90 minutes, and the NYPD and the fire department were there, and so in an unfathomable tragedy. And our response to that was completely rooted in our community. And we are fortunate enough in our club to have a health and safety committee, which sounds great. We never planned for that. But in that committee, we had a mental health expert who's a counselor. She's a mediator. She runs these things called restorative circles. She knew how to find the right grief counselor for us. And the connection to our community was what literally day by day, sometimes hour by hour, I think helped that team, those boys, the coaches, the families who were all traumatized move forward. And I tie that back to what I mentioned earlier about character strengths. And I know I take the character strength survey annually, so I sort of see where I'm at. And since I've been a player and a coach and now an executive. Teamwork and the capacity to love and be loved are consistently my two greatest strengths. And I realized that bringing people together, staying connected to our community, giving power and agency to those other people to help their fellow parents and players through this was the best thing that I can do. And that team still has stuck together, and the family is with our club. It's amazing how resilient that they have been, and they, as they say, we'll never leave this community. It's not the team, it's not the coach, it's this community of people.
That's great. Anyone else want to comment on this?
Well, yeah, and I think when it comes to responsibility as leaders, that's one of the things that I'm addicted to personal growth. And I think the only way to grow personally is to break down walls. You're a collection of the experiences that you had, and there are things along your journey that served you. And there are certain things that no longer serve you. And I think when we look at how we build up kids and how we continue to support their development through sport, we now have to look at, all right, we know what got us here. There's some great things that served sport in developing kids all along the way. There were some things that at this point, no longer serve us. They no longer serve the development of kids. And we have to be really clear and honest around what is no longer serving and outlaw it. Like it's no longer acceptable moving forward. And so I think we just have to draw the line in recognizing what served the development of kids in sports and what is no longer serving us anymore.
That's great. As I was listening to a lot of the answers to these questions, unfortunately, there's been a lot of reactive measures that have been put in place, which hopefully for everyone in the room, and I see a lot of people taking notes, you can proactively think about, instituting some of these practices. And at the end of the day, it's a tighter community. So again, this is going to probably come off as an impossible question, but is there one step, one protocol that you wish every organization had in place?
I can at least
Everyone's
start.
taking a deep breath there. There's like 100, so what's the one you want to?
I think one of the things that I've been focused on in terms of just leading our people is in coach development and leadership, there's a responsibility to be on mission. And I'll kind of describe what I mean by mission. In our company, everyone in our company has their own personal mission statement. Yes, your club, your organization has its mission statement. But how is that aligning with your own personal mission statement, and are we holding everyone accountable to live out that mission? So my personal mission is to create a world of love, acceptance, and safety. Do courageous leadership, empathy, and using my voice. I want to be held accountable to that every day. And so in developing coaches and leaders, we have to, I want them to set, all right, what world are you creating? Why did you coach? And what is the outcome? And is that outcome aligned with ours? And I'm going to hold you accountable. And then when that line is crossed, we have specific protocols around how we're going to respond to it. And I think just making it very clear around, like, what are we about as an organization, right, and also what we're expecting of our members, of our coaches, of our leaders, is extremely important.
I think it's important, and as you heard from Brian and Jeremy earlier today, League Apps is a mission-driven. Everything we do is driven on that mission. So publicly sharing, this is our mission, and we're going to hold you to that mission and that vision. It's great, because if everyone's aligned with that mission, if they go off the course,
can you walk the talk?
And
if a kid is struggling with something, and your mission says you want to create a world of love, acceptance, and safety, how are you showing up in that and supporting them?
That's right.
I think the two things that come to mind from here are education and resources, and I know those are very broad. But I think about education from the standpoint, how many people in here had a class about emotions and how to name your emotions? Anybody ever had a class about self-care and what it is to regulate your feelings and to engage in like practices? Yes, 3, yes. How many of you had it before the age of 15? So I think education, right? Like educating our kids. What are emotions? Name them, right? Integrate that into your practices when you do your check-ins with your kids at the beginning and the end of practice. Like, teach them about what it is to engage in self-regulatory activities, breathing, mindfulness, self-talk. Get them to say it out loud so you can hear the self-talk, so you can work on maybe shifting it from being negative and critical to being positive and encouraging, right? I think we have to integrate some of these mental performance skills that we're talking about. We have to integrate mental health as a part of the overall training. Think about it as, some people label it as an intangible. I think it's a real tangible because it impacts how people think, feel, and show up. Right? And so I think we have to educate folks about it. And I realize we've been talking about mental health this whole time and haven't even offered a definition of that, right? And so thinking about mental health by definition is a state of well-being. When we historically think about mental health, we think about mental illness, signs and symptoms, stressors, adversity. But mental health, just like physical health, is a state of well-being, right? It's a state of well-being in which people can reach their potential, connect with others, cope with stress, contribute to their community, work fruitfully. So what are we doing to educate kids about how to do that? I think sometimes we treat kids as though they're not having full experiences, and they are. And so how are we educating about mental health and helping them to proactively, right, and intentionally do things to develop their mental health, and then resources on the back end, right? Certainly resources in the tragic situations that some of you all have shared, and I'm sorry that you had to walk through that. But having resources available allowed you to walk through that, right? But also resources like mental performance consultants, who's coming in to teach your kids some of these skills, right? Mental health professionals doesn't have to come in, we don't have to come in and do a session, we can come in and teach. You know, again, that education. So I think education and resources are two of the big things that I wish everyone had access to. And last thing I'll say in terms of education, mental health first aid is a mental health education session. It's about 8 hours, but it's excellent. It gives you a foundation about a range of mental health conditions, signs, symptoms, what to look for. And then QPR, question, persuade, refer, is a training specifically focused on suicidal behaviors, gestures, and how you can ask somebody, are you feeling suicidal, to help as a preventative way to intervene and offer support for someone who might be struggling with those types of thoughts. Mental health first aid, and then QPR, question, persuade, refer, both educational workshops that can be done in person or virtually in COVID, but they really are great, and I encourage people to take them.
Yeah, so we use that at MLB as well. So, and you can do that online, takes a day. So I encourage all our coaches and administrators to do that, absolutely. I second that. Psychoeducation, obviously, right? We're in a mental health epidemic, and not just in terms of prevalence rates, but also in terms of access. And then we could break that down even more. It's a whole other conversation in terms of minority access, rural access, and so forth. So the idea is, how do we get it to before there is a problem, right? And it's through education, psychoeducation, and we look at these basic skills, let's say self-confidence, arousal control, attentional control, mindfulness, motivation, emotional regulation. These are things that can be taught, and I think a lot of coaches think they're fixed. This kid either has it or he doesn't. That's absolutely not true. There is no ambiguity around this. These are skills, and we know how to teach them. There's a best method to do it. So it doesn't have to be a professional. It doesn't have to be someone like us that are coming in. You can take it upon yourself to start having classes and start having these discussions and offering a bibliotherapy. In other words, give them books to read and then have discussions around it. There are ways to incorporate this within the ecosystem that you can take responsibility. It doesn't just have to be the professional that's doing it.
That's super helpful.
One of the ways we integrate that into our club is we have character traits integrated into the playing curriculum. And I'm fortunate that we have a director of coaching in our club who embraces that. So, for one cycle in terms of our playing philosophy and the curriculum for the next few weeks, we'll have curiosity integrated in, and we'll have a session with our coaches about how do you integrate curiosity as a character trait into practice, and well, it's playing a different position, shifting. We go from a 4-4-2 to a 4-3-3. What would that look like? How would we do that? How can that empower us, make us better players? It's easy to integrate things like perseverance, self-regulation, courage to young athletes, but doing it and placing the same level of importance as you do in knowing how to create better restarts for your team is absolutely essential, I think. And if our directors and coaches then are consistent and as committed to that, then that will hopefully trickle down to our players. And what we do is we put that information out there. We let our families know this is what we'll be working on, this is what the strength is. This month, we put it in social media. We filter that through our values and missions. And so that when we don't, and when we fall short, which we do, our community lets us know. And so that's one way that we do that.
Anything, Mark?
Well, as a high school coach, you know, prior to every season, I have to take these NFHS online courses in concussion protocol, first aid, and, you know, as an answer to your question, I would like to see some type of mental health wellness awareness become a requirement for coaches, really at all levels, but would like to see that be that type of requirement as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I would say add the training and the education for the parents as well. We don't want to leave them out, right? Because, you know, when I asked how many of you have had a class on emotions, on self-care, the parents would answer very similarly to how you answered. So thinking about education for the parents as well, so they can better understand their role in tending to this garden.
I think that's the challenge we all face, right? It's how do you talk about this with your players, with your parents, with your coaches, with your organization. And so it's, you know, I keep coming back to the word community, right? This is the community, so how do we talk about it with the community? On behalf of all the panelists, I want to thank you all for being here and sharing your stories and asking questions. So a round of applause for all of you that are out here. And then, you know, I'm gonna stand here and just the gratitude to the five of you for your wisdom, the expertise, sharing with everyone here in the room. Thank you guys for your time today. There is a sort of channel within the app that people have asked questions, and we'll post some resources. We also will continue this conversation in the digital community that I'll be announcing tomorrow that League Apps has opened up, where we can continue the conversations from today well into the future. So thank you all for being here today. I believe we're going off to lunch. This is wonderful. Take that deep breath maybe before you stand up. I almost a little weary there, but again, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing all your faces throughout the rest of this conference. Thank you.